In the last episode, we talked about the Battle of Stalingrad, which ended with the defeat of the German Sixth Army, and the surrender of Paulus. After a brief period of silence, at Prokhorovka in the Kursk region, both sides fought a decisive tank battle. Two army groups under Manstein were defeated, and withdrew from Soviet territory. From then on, the Soviet army firmly held the initiative on the Eastern Front. The Soviet army gave the German army no chance to breathe, gathering the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Belarusian fronts, 3 Ukrainian fronts, a total of 270 divisions, 20 tank and mechanized corps, 14 air armies, a total of 2.5 million troops, marched straight to the German capital Berlin. At this time, the two German army groups and garrison forces had only 48 infantry divisions, 9 motorized divisions, 6 armored divisions, with 800,000 troops, completely unable to organize an effective defense line. Counterattack was a delusion. On April 16, 1945, the Soviet army broke through the German Oder and Nysa River defense lines. On the 25th, they formed the siege of the capital, Berlin. The Soviet army and the Allied forces won consecutive victories. Berlin seemed to be within reach, but unexpectedly, they faced a battle more fierce than on Soviet territory. This city of millions of people was now in ruins, reduced to rubble. In the heart of the city, under the feet of the Soviet army, stood the Reichstag building. This building, which had witnessed the history of Germany in World War I and World War II, had now become a military fortress. After undergoing extensive renovation and expansion, the basement had been converted into a hospital and command center. The windows were sealed, and the roof was equipped with multiple anti-aircraft guns. 2,000 of Germany's most elite SS troops were here, ready to fight. The truly last battle between the Soviet Union and Germany was destined to be a bloodbath. After the failure of the German Ardennes counteroffensive in 1944, in the spring of 1945, the Allied forces advanced towards Berlin from two directions. The 1st Belarusian front, led by Zhukov, reached the banks of the Oder River before the Western Allies, only a little over 100 kilometers from German territory. On April 16, 1 million Soviet troops broke through the defenses of the Oder-Nysa line held by the German Ninth Army. Although the Ninth Army fought tenaciously, forcing the Soviet army to pay a high price for every meter gained, the German army, having almost lost control of the air, was still no match for the overwhelming Soviet artillery fire. Continued, 90,000 troops of the Ninth Army were surrounded by a much larger Soviet force. After suffering 40,000 casualties, they successfully broke through and continued to fight on the outskirts of Berlin. On April 25, 1 million Soviet troops completed the encirclement of Berlin. Thousands of aircraft, in the skies above Berlin, dropped tens of thousands of tons of bombs and napalm. On the ground, thousands of artillery pieces, including Katyushas, concentrated fire on Berlin. The German Ninth Army was relentlessly pursued by the Soviet and American armies. Unable to reinforce Berlin, Soviet infantry and tank divisions marched straight into the city of Berlin. At this point, only the elite SS forces remained in Berlin. The rest were civilians and children who had been temporarily mobilized, posing no threat to the Soviet army. On April 28, the Soviet army had occupied most of the urban areas of Berlin, leaving only small, scattered pockets of resistance. The German and Soviet armies engaged in fierce street fighting. Most of Berlin was now in the hands of the Soviet army, but in the eyes of the Soviet High Command, only capturing the Reichstag building in the city center would be a true victory. The Allied forces, however, didn't think so. In their eyes, German engineers and blueprints were the real prizes. Facing the overwhelming Soviet forces closing in on the city, Hitler decided to withdraw the headquarters from Berlin, staying behind himself to share the fate of the city. He ordered everyone, without exception, to take up arms and fight, executing all deserters and cowards. In the eyes of the German soldiers, the Reichstag was a symbol of German dignity. The highest-ranking commander within Berlin, General Helmuth Weidling, the city's defense commandant, lays out the city's defensive lines. He divides the garrison troops into smaller units to engage in urban guerrilla warfare, preventing their complete annihilation by the Soviet army. After issuing the combat orders, 1,500 Waffen-SS soldiers volunteered to defend the Reichstag. Another 500 foreign soldiers from Eastern Europe also stepped forward to join the defense of the Reichstag. These 2,000 men are battle-hardened veterans, armed with the finest equipment, determined to fight to the death, to prove their loyalty to the Third Reich and the Führer. Defensive positions are established not just within the building, but also in the square in front of it. The defenders create inner and outer defensive lines around the square and the Reichstag. Not only are fortifications constructed using sandbags and concrete, but multiple firing positions are strategically placed. On the ground floor of the Reichstag, over 100 bunkers and machine gun nests are dug. Each bunker is equipped with an MG-42 machine gun. From the windows of each floor of the Reichstag, the defenders deploy multiple anti-tank rocket launchers and hammers for close combat. The Soviet mechanized corps advances steadily towards the city center. Since the beginning of the battle, the Soviet army has been conquering one city after another. German forces within the city streets are gradually being eliminated. The Soviet Union's most elite vanguard, the 3rd Shock Army and the 8th Guards Army, are the first to reach the Tiergarten district, near the Reichstag. General Kuznetsov commands the Soviet forces to attack the Reichstag from the north. The Nazi SS's defensive preparations and their will to fight at the Reichstag far exceed the Soviet expectations. In the first engagement, the 150th Rifle Division of the Soviet Third Shock Army sends in a reconnaissance force of 200 soldiers, only to suffer complete annihilation. In siege warfare, such heavily fortified positions are usually bombarded with heavy artillery until destroyed. However, the Soviets aim to capture the Reichstag intact. Capturing it holds immense symbolic significance. The Soviet High Command orders the Reichstag to be taken at all costs, but the SS's crossfire is overwhelmingly powerful. The STG-44 assault rifles cut down the advancing Soviet troops. In droves, General Kuznetsov dispatches the troops who had captured the German Chancellery, along with 100 artillery pieces, to the Reichstag. Their objective: to eliminate the SS defenders, but the Reichstag proves to be an impenetrable fortress. Despite their repeated courageous assaults, the Soviet soldiers are mowed down by the withering SS fire. The Soviets are forced to revise their strategy. They establish positions in the square outside the Reichstag, facing the impenetrable Reichstag. The Soviets exhaust all their options. They try everything they can think of. First, they use artillery to destroy the outer defensive positions. The defending Germans immediately withdraw inside the building to continue fighting. The Soviets then attempt to persuade the Germans to surrender. They inform them that their Führer committed suicide the day before, and that their forces have all surrendered. They argue that further resistance is pointless. They even bring captured German officers to the front lines to address the SS and urge them to surrender. The only response is the roar of machine guns. Faced with the unyielding SS, the Soviets have no choice but to resume their assault. They relentlessly bombard the first floor, clearing out the firing points, and then launch a charge, capturing the ground floor. But before the Soviets can gain a foothold on the first floor, SS grenades rain down from above. To counter the relentless Soviet offensive, the defenders have booby-trapped every room in the building. They use every room as a defensive position, forcing the Soviets into brutal close-quarters combat. On every floor and in every room, out of ammunition, the SS resort to using knives, hammers, fists, and teeth to fight the Soviets. Corner Germans detonate grenades, choosing death over surrender. This is no longer a battle, it's a living hell. Faced with heavy casualties, and the seemingly impregnable Reichstag, the Soviets set up heavy machine guns. On each floor, they unleash a barrage of large-caliber bullets at the remaining enemy positions. This finally cripples the SS's ability to resist within the building. On April 30th, the Soviets finally raise the red flag atop the Reichstag, but inside the Reichstag, tenacious SS soldiers continue to fight. The last one isn't killed until May 2nd. All 2,000 SS defenders of the Reichstag are killed in action. The Battle of the Reichstag is over. At 7 a.m., German General Weidling, the city's defense commandant, signs the instrument of surrender to Soviet Marshal Zhukov. Approximately 150,000 German soldiers within Berlin lay down their arms and surrender. On May 9, 1945, Dönitz, on behalf of the German High Command, signs the unconditional surrender to the Soviet Union. World War II in Europe comes to an end. On August 15, 1945, Japan, the last Axis power, also announces its unconditional surrender. During the Battle of Berlin, the Reichstag defense, a brutal fight between 2,000 SS soldiers and tens of thousands of Soviet troops, was considered by Soviet generals to be no less significant than any major battle. The determination and bravery of the SS are extremely rare in the history of human warfare. They are fundamentally different from the warmongers and the so-called gods of war. The warmongers dragged humanity into 2 world wars, leaving countless civilians suffering and displaced. The wars caused immeasurable trauma. The deaths of these SS soldiers and Soviet Red Army soldiers represent the highest spirit and faith of humanity. Both sides fought for a belief, for the love of their own country. War is the most foolish way to solve problems. In brutal and bloody battles, it is always the civilians who suffer the most. War is a crime, a tragedy of human civilization. World wars, especially, are self-destruction, a catastrophe for humanity, driven by the madness of a few. War leaves behind ruins, desolation, hatred, pain, and despair. For a better tomorrow, our world needs more understanding, more cooperation, and less confrontation and conflict. We should use human wisdom to preserve all that is good in the world. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked my video, please like, subscribe, and comment. Your subscription would be the greatest encouragement.